SwayamPrabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello everyone. In today's module, we will cover some examples of ignorance of the design principle, the repercussions, the challenges in governing process in managing the commons, the solution in form of polycentric governance that was put forward by Ostrom, and we will also discuss or end this module by discussing the critique and the challenges of the IAD framework. Since we have discussed the IAD framework in the last class and how it proposed to be a solution to the tragedy of the commons, let us highlight some insights where ignoring the rules that were laid by Ostrom can cause high level of conflict with regard to the ownership, overexploitation and degradation of the commons. We will reflect certain cases from India to provide a contextual basis to your understanding of the IAD framework. When we consider resources, then we find a range of conflicts associated with them, their use and management, and this dates back to the British colonialism as stated by Guha, to the recent conflict such as those that occur in Noida and Shingur and Jaitapur, land grabbing incidences, and Kaveri and Yamuna river water governance crisis or Bhopal gas tragedy. If we see them, then these are the points where we can see of resources and conflicts associated with them. The major reason for the same encompass the ill governance with regard to the nature of legal services and poor alternatives and action-oriented approaches. In the 5 Indian cases mentioned earlier with reference to the land, water and air, the tragedy of the commons could have been easily avoided if the government had followed what Ostrom was proposing through her 8 design principles. And the varied dimensions such as ecological and cultural as well as local understanding of the cost and the benefit attached to the property. In case of the tragedy of the commons witnessed in case of Singur and Noida, the 2 instances highlight the clear ignorance of Ostrom's first and the second rule, advocating the group boundaries and work with rules that are formulated in congruence with local needs, along with the defiance of the 8th rule of governing commons in a nested tier with an interconnected system. In relation to the tragedy of the water, as witnessed with respect to the rivers like Kaveri and Yamuna, Ostrom's first, second, third and the 7th rules were largely ignored, which could have resolved the water dispute and the pollution issues. The first rule supported defining the group boundaries, and we had discussed in the last class. The second related to the matching of the common goods in accordance with the local needs. The third looked into power within the hands of the stakeholders who can modify rules on their own accord, and finally the 7th rule discusses the provision of accessible low-cost means of dispute resolution. Finally, the 5th and the 6th rule of Ostrom could have helped avert the tragedy in case of air, or that is the Bhopal gas tragedy. The 5th rule cites the monitoring of behavior of members in the regulation of resources, while the sixth talks about the sanctions that are issued for the violators. Even today, the settlement cases are still on. Also violating the seventh rule that discusses the low cost means of dispute resolution, all of these examples highlight the necessity of a strict revision of the processes of governance of the commons. As we can see that it is essential to have proper governance in the process of managing the commons. Let us take a look into the different challenges that arise in the governance process. One of the most common problems in managing the commons resource is the lack of proper machineries to manage the negative environmental externalities. There is an absence of regulatory mechanisms to control the activities of private parties, citizens, and the governments. There are challenges in understanding the limits of both socio-economic and the biophysical attributes of the ecological systems to apply a uniform method. There also lies the necessity of formulations of legal framework to regulate activities that lead to the degradation of the common resources. Apart from these, the challenges of governance that are faced by the state, there are also challenges that occur in relation to transparency of the social network that plays an important role in the access to commons. And according to Bodin and Corna, most of the legal framework derive their essence from the societal parameters. The above discussion has highlighted the importance of the role of the government and the governance play in the management of the commons. In the context, Elinor Ostrom had performed a large number of experiments to determine the nature of governance that best suits the management of the commons. In the following section, hence, we will discuss the ways of governance that are most useful in coping with the tragedy of the commons. Ostrom had highlighted certain advantages and disadvantages when dealing with the common resource, or when dealing with a parallel set of local users in her policy experiments, assessing a full decentralized system of governing the commons. Here, the decision-making power is in the hands of the locals or the small-scale common pool resource users. Some of the advantages include stakeholders who are in charge have in-depth insight and local knowledge of functioning of the biophysical system of their respective resources, as the success of their appropriation depends on the local knowledge. These people have a deeper understanding of the local behavior and the degrees of what is appropriate and what is not in the context of the resource use. As the management is entirely local, the trustworthiness of the included resources or the resource manager is guaranteed, which also saves the time and the cost of sanctioning and guarding the resources. As the management is entirely local, the trustworthiness of the included resource managers is guaranteed. Dependence on the knowledge, that is, disaggregated knowledge of the decentralized local system of managing the commons. Feedback of changes in which the resource system responds to the action of the resource appropriators is all generated in a way that is disaggregated. For example, fishers are aware of changes in the size and the species distribution of their catch, and when it changes with time, or irrigators get their ideas about the effectiveness of water allocation through identifying the yield amount. Localized management also instills rules that are adapted in a way or in a more cohesive manner that is in synchronization with the functioning of the local resource. As most of the management occurs with the help of local appropriators, themselves, the cost of enforcement of laws and monitoring are much lower in this case. Finally, as there are decentralized units that experiment with the rules of resource management, there are low costs or low chances of failure of laws for a whole region. Now, let us discuss about the disadvantages of a highly decentralized system in managing a common resource. Firstly, the differential interest of the appropriators in managing or regulating for the resource, some of them might not have due interest, which also might be because of the existent alternative sources of income and lower level of resource dependence, internal conflicts among appropriators, poor leadership, and a fearful attitude anticipating overturning of efforts by the outside authorities might lead to a disadvantage of the highly decentralized managing system. Second is the complexity of designing rules, and poor adaptation to modify rules might result in the self-organized efforts to fail. Thirdly, the non-democratically organized governance system of the resource would lead to the creation of power elites and tyranny, and this is more extreme in location where the appropriators are unable to leave the resource usage at a lower cost. Fourthly, the stagnation may happen due to reduced innovation by the appropriators in the ecological system, which are subject to variability. The success of certain rules might lead the appropriators to simply stick to them and not to try and improve their management system. Fifthly, providing identity tags for the purpose of increasing trust and conformity towards rules is an essential element. However, this might lead to the creation of exclusion and discrimination against certain sections of the appropriators. Sixthly, due to the close-knit local level, of most sources of information, proper scientific information might be limited regarding the type of the resource and the procedures of managing the same. Seventhly, if there are lacking of external conflict resolution mechanisms, there might arise conflict between two or more groups who might claim ownership and control over the common pool resource, which might hinder again the proper management of the same as well as lead to violence. Finally, sometimes local appropriators might not be able to manage a common pool resource which might be of a larger scale, leading to the problem of poor regulation. As per Ostrom, the governance that has power of managing the common pool resources are the polycentric governance systems that can cope with the tragedy of the commons. By polycentric, Ostrom referred to a system where citizens are able to organize not just one but multiple governing authorities at different scales. With particular geographical area, each unit has a degree of interdependence to create and implement rules within a certain scope of authority. According to McGuinness, with such a system, some units may be specialized type of government while some are general purposed ones. These self-organized resource governance system might be of varied types such as special districts or part of local government or private associations being installed within several government levels having their own degrees of civil equity and their own criminal codes. In the context of power of people, users of common pool resources can make some rules in accordance with their usage to utilize the advantages of the local knowledge. As well, a blend of scientific and local level knowledge is also a positive point found within the polycentric common pool resource governance systems. For example, the formal and the long established law in the state of Maine, as well as the example of the Pacific salmon fisheries in Washington and its management are good examples of functional polycentric systems that work better than the federal policies. It is not very easy to cope with the potential common pool resource related tragedies. However, it can be established by the methods proposed by Ostrom that those who are dependent on the common resources are not trapped in a situation of guaranteed worsening condition. The managing policy largely hold the power to adapt the resource use, making functional incorporation of the multiple stakeholders who are present at the different levels. Ostrom explained the need for more in-depth development of better theories and complex adaptive systems that can contribute to the aversion of the tragedy of the commons and promote their sustainability for the generations to come. Hence, in this lecture, we saw the importance of the IAD framework and its practical application in the form of the design principles. The degree of influence that the principles can have is witnessed from the 5 examples that discussed the tragedy of land, water and air by not abiding the Ostrom design principle, where again the resources were held in common. Although there are large degrees of benefits that have been achieved through the framework and the design principle governing the action situation, there are criticisms and challenges that have been posed by Michael Cox, Arnold, Thomas and as well as Ostrom. So these scholars have identified 3 main critiques of Ostrom's design principle, which include the following. First, the review inferred that large number of scholars considered the design principle to be incomplete in nature and there needs for additional attributes for a sustainable management of the resource. The second criticism is that it encompasses the design principle with its degree of wide application in variable cases beyond those that were used to develop them. Finally, the third criticism outlined by Cox and others is what is considered as the design principle in itself. Large number of authors tend to argue for a more constructivist or environmentally and socially embedded angle which does not only focus on the actors as the rational decision makers and without any inherent heterogeneity and conflict within the communities. So, Ostrom IAD framework is also criticized for lacking the study of power relation. Clement proposed a politicized version of the well-established IAD framework. He has included political economic context and discourse as exogenous variables in addition to the original focus on rules in use, biophysical conditions, community attributes, action arenas and the patterns of interaction. Thus, the theory that Ostrom proposed, we can see, is evolving day by day, where different scholars are adding on to her design principle. And as we all know, one theory cannot be complete in itself, and we need to evolve the theory if we want to implement it in the present context. Similarly, even if Ostrom was criticized for her design principles or the IAD framework, if we see Clement has brought in additional dimensions of including power into it, which is making it more comprehensive than the way it was. So, however, we will keep on discussing about these theories later. Thank you for listening and have a great day ahead.